So, hi everyone. Nice to share space with you these past few days, this evening included. Last night, when Gulu was giving his talk, I was sitting where Gulu is sitting now, right next to Juna. And I forget at what point, I think when Gulu was talking about doubt, he said something like, when you don't have faith, borrow the faith of others, your teachers or your friends. Then he looked over. I was like, oh, I did that for him on the month-long retreat that he mentioned. I was like, I didn't know. And then he proceeded to talk about Juna. And I remember that retreat for many reasons, but one of the things I also remember at the end of that retreat, I was talking to another practitioner, and we talked about Juna, and I had told her this as well, but it was about how Juna was such a presence in the hall, and whenever I was in the hall, she was already there. And like Gulu described, sitting at the front, really straight posture. And so as I was talking about this with this other yogi, and she was like, yeah, so different from you. And I was like, And I was like, what do you mean? And then she's like, oh, last one in, first one out. Everyone has their style, I guess. But all this to say is, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a reluctant student or a reluctant practitioner, but this path is not easy for me. And I want to start with that because I think when all the years that I sat where you're sitting, and when I would look over at the teachers, I would think like, wow, they have it together. All their emails answered, all their voicemails listened to, all their laundry folded, like their life is just put together. Look at how they're sitting and how still they are. Just this whole projection, basically. And I don't know about the others, but that's not the case for me. And it doesn't mean that if it is challenging or if we don't present a certain way that we don't belong in any way, as I've tried to remind us in different ways throughout the past few days. Other ways that I might feel as if I don't belong could be, I don't consider myself as someone with a very good memory, although my partner would say different. He would say, you remember that time I didn't do that so I guess I have selective good memory, but I have a hard time remembering suttas or the words of the chants. On retreats is when I discovered that I am prone to anxiety and panic attacks. And that was a surprise because I was going to go meditate. I was going to be peaceful. I was trying to get enlightened even. But what I came out with was this knowledge of that, oh, my system is actually quite sensitive to this container that we create on retreat. And so in a lot of ways, I thought, oh yeah, like this is going to be different for me. And as it is different for all of us. This path of practice is often referred to as a purification path. And when I think of that, and I think of maybe how my practice feels and how I think your practice is, because it's really just projection, I don't really know. It's kind of like the whole range of of washing. So the purification piece comes to mind as like washing cycles. And there's like the gentle cycle. There could even be like the hand wash with special soap, warm water, let it soak for a little while. Then you rub it caringly, kind of thing. And then a lot of times, especially on retreats where my panic and anxiety is quite prevalent, it feels like I'm stuck on the spin cycle, and that the machine is just kind of banging against the wall or something like that. And yet, I'm still here. I've even had a teacher actually say on one retreat, "And you didn't leave? You're still here?" Then I was like, oh, I could have left. But anyways, that's a missed opportunity now, but I'm still here. And I stay because it has proven to be, time and time again, the most reliable thing in my life that brings me deep and sustainable and long-lasting happiness. This sort of contentment that is unshakable. Don't get me wrong, I do like hot tubs and massages and Netflixing, etc. And yet, as my practice deepens, there is a knowing that that is something that brings me temporary relief. Or when my system is quite activated, when I'm out in the world, those things are self-soothing. They help me calm my system in order for me to turn toward, once again, this practice. And the Buddha would call this trading candy for gold, where we're trading lesser pleasures for greater happiness. And so all of this to say is that this path is called practice because it's not easy to do. Especially at this point in the retreat, it's the end of the third full day. And so we're really in the beating heart of the retreat. We're in the middle of the retreat. And then if I think of like an arc of a storyline or something like that, usually this is where it's particularly challenging or unpleasant. If you're one of the few for whom it's not at all challenging, keep going. You know, just because I'm saying these words, I don't want you to think, "Oh, should I be suffering more?" Like, let me call. No. Be careful what you wish for is what I've been telling people. I've heard our beloved teachers quote Ajahn Chah in regards to this practice, saying that it's like walking into a hurricane. Why would we do that? It certainly sounds unpleasant, at least for me. Scary sometimes, destabilizing at the best. But it is still important work, or it's an important thing to do, because we're trying to understand the winds that might otherwise push and pull us. And this pushing and pulling can last our entire lives if we didn't have this practice. So winds like birth and loss, praise and blame, gain, loss, pleasure, pain. And when we turn toward the hurricane, well, then what can happen, especially with a practice that deepens, we can start to touch into this groundedness, this centeredness, this collectiveness that is unshakable. A lot of you know the First Noble Truth. I feel like, and so the First Noble Truth of dukkha, and I find like if ever I come across cartoons or maybe a blog that summarizes world religions in one-liners, it's often like Buddhism is the one about suffering. And I think they're pulling from this First Noble Truth that life is suffering, or the truth of dukkha. But it means so much more than just pain and misery. And when I say just in that, it's not because pain and misery is something small and easy to get over, but rather pain and misery don't really encompass the essence of dukkha. It could mean dis-ease or things not subject to our control. I've heard it as well as being separated from that which we love or like or want. A translation or what it can mean is bad space or wrong space, and it was originally used to describe the axle of a wheel. And when that axle was just slightly off, imagine, at least at the time of the Buddha, like an ox cart, one of those wheels would kind of be wonky. So like off-center is another way to describe it. And we don't really have ox carts now, but I think a present-day version of dukkha in this image would be a grocery cart with that one wonky wheel, basically. And so anyways, I say this because it could, not to make fun of these teachings by any means, but it's to show the range that it could be the grocery cart with the wonky wheel all the way up to pain and misery. And so all this to say is that instead of life is suffering, I like life includes suffering. Because a lot of us are tuning into, even though it might be challenging at this point of the retreat, that it is not only challenging. I've seen some of you sitting on where's the patio? Over there, on the patio, just looking out. Or you're doing walking practice and standing. I saw someone with their eyes closed, with their face turned toward the sun. It could be the moment you step into the shower, and it could be that temperature of water that is exactly what you wanted and expected. It could be when you crawl into bed in the evening and the sheets are cold and your body is warm after a day of practice. And so there are moments, our days are filled with these moments. And it's really normal that our mind will orient only toward, or mostly toward, the more obvious, extreme, strong sensations or phenomena. And yet, it is not just dukkha, basically. And the invitation that comes with this First Noble Truth is to understand it. So to understand suffering, but not in a masochist way, in this balanced way, in this way that is onward leading, that helps to cultivate wisdom, and that could eventually lead to a freedom from suffering. Kittisaro mentioned in his talk the other night, Ajahn Chah, if you understand one thing well, you understand everything. If you try to understand everything, you risk not understanding anything well. Something like that, yeah. And so basically the source of the problem, of the challenges that we might be experiencing or what might be arising at this point in our retreat is not necessarily just out there in the world. It's not about getting rid of them, getting rid of that thing, fixing that, etc. But it's about our relationship to what is here, to what's going on inside of ourselves, in our inner landscape, in our heart and mind. After the talks, you might know that we huddle into the teacher's lounge and we do a debrief on the day, but mostly around the talks. And we did this last year, and we're doing it again this year, but we kind of rope T and K to tell us stories. And it's one of my favorite parts, you know, and it's stories that I've heard already, whether it's in talks, in their books, or just from last year asking them to tell us the same stories. And so I just really appreciate hearing them and thinking about their time on the monastery, about the early days of practice. And then I haven't practiced on a monastery in a few years, but it brings to mind some of my practice experience. And so the one time, the place where I really started understanding this idea of the relationship to what is happening was when I was practicing in Burma at Shui O Min, which is where Sayadaw U Tejaniya is the abbot, the head monk. And he's a great meditation master, and he's quite unique as well. I'm not sure about now, but at that time, it was maybe 10 years ago or so, he had 2 iPhones, and he would play Angry Birds. And that was the first and only monastery that we got internet for 1 hour a day. So when I heard that, I'm like, where do I register? I'm not sure if it's the same but what I thought was really sweet was that we would be a bunch of monks, nuns, and lay practitioners huddling into his kuti, his little hut, because that's where the modem was. And then we would be, you know, doing our internet things for an hour. Some days there would be more people trying to get online, and other days not so much. And I remember one day, it was particularly busy. There was a lot of people in the kuti. And so I was like trying to send a message and it wasn't going through. And then I was just like pressing my screen harder, holding my phone, gripping it. And until I heard his voice and he yelled out, "What is your relationship to the internet now?" And that was such that totally snapped me out of my fighting the moment. I was fighting what was happening. And then he went back after laughing at us. He went back and then he was playing his Angry Birds. And so I just really appreciated experiencing that in a practice setting because it really informed, wait, I can do this not just sitting and walking, but when I'm engaging with technology, when I'm engaging with like worldly things. And then it really opened up my practice so much more. But we don't have internet here. Your phones are on retreat. And so what we are practicing with is what is coming up in the stationary practice and the movement practice and all the times in between, basically. And so we're doing it in this granular way because it can be the seed of so much. Each time you don't scratch that itch or adjust your posture, each time you decide, or each time you don't talk yourself out of cutting your walking period short, each time we don't make an unpleasant state the enemy, we're taking refuge in this not fighting, this non-contention. We're taking refuge in the way things are. We're practicing not condemning, not judging, not punishing, basically. And I know we're in the heart of the retreat, but I like to sometimes think if we could do that to ourselves, if we can not fight ourselves, not fight what comes up, really and truly. And then I think of sometimes like this, like champagne glass tower, and that if we can do that with ourselves, so it's like we're filling the top glass, and then maybe it'll flow out to those in our communities that we love, and then it keeps flowing out. And so imagine if we don't condemn, don't punish, don't judge our loved ones, those we don't know, strangers, maybe those we might not even get along with. What a different world it would be. And so not to underestimate the seeds that you're planting now, basically. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be okay all of the time. I think one of the ways it can manifest is simply asking ourselves, am I willing to meet this moment without contention? Because when we're able to, when we actually can meet the moment, that's where our superpower lies, or that's where our power lies, in responding to what's actually here. Not in responding to all of our thoughts about what we think should be here. I think it was Gulu who had said, this moment is not as bad as you think it is, last night. So it's that. We're moving from a thought-based reality into a sense-based reality, something a lot more immediate in this moment. The Buddha has said, a gathered mind sees things as they are. And then we could maybe, by deduction, think, well, an ungathered or scattered mind will then see things through views and opinions. Right, wrong, what should, shouldn't be, etc. And even though the Buddha, at least in this case, is talking about the mind, a gathered mind, a scattered mind, it's really an embodiment practice. At least that's the case for me. You know, sometimes I hear, oh, this is like a pretty mental practice. And it is imperfect. We're using the mind to train the mind. But for me, it really all happens in the body. That teacher, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, he would say that we are data collectors. And so what we're doing is we're taking information in through the senses, basically. And so that's how we can make it more of an embodied experience, taking it in through the senses. And I like to see, well, then how does it land or manifest in my body? When I hear a loud sound that might be unpleasant or that surprises me. When I taste something that is warm and flavorful after hours of not eating, etc. This is from a Buddhist tantric text. To renounce the sense objects is to torture oneself by asceticism. Don't do it. When you see form, look. Similarly, listen to sounds, inhale scents, taste flavors, feel textures. Use the objects of the five senses, and you will quickly attain supreme Buddhahood. One of the ways, as I quickly described, is when, say, I do take something in from through the senses, I try to tune into the sensation. So again, the sense-based reality of it. And so one of the things that we can do together, if you'd like, to experience it a little bit more tangibly, is to take one of your hands and just look at your hand. And you can move it in any way you like, and notice what might arise when you're looking and moving your hand. What kinds of thoughts? It could be that scars from when I fell when I was 6. I really need lotion. I hope that's not the lifeline because it cuts really short or whatever. And then now keep moving your hand as you are, but close your eyes. And now we're dropping into, or we're moving from this thought-based reality, views, opinions, into sense-based reality. tingling, warmth, coolness, pain, spaciousness. And then you can lower your hand. If your eyes are closed, you can open them. And so that's a simple and direct way that we can experience or move from thought-based to sense-based. And what I appreciate, and we didn't do it very long, and this is something that, I don't know, what you can try, whether with the hand or something else, but when I'm really into the sensations of my hand, this concept of hand even falls away. And it's just simply the sensations. And I love that particularly because I use this hand all the time. And if hand, the label of hand can even fall away, it's just like, what else is possible in the sense-based realm? And two things immediately come to mind is like gender and race. Yeah. Zenju Earthlyn Manuel, an author, poet, Zen Buddhist priest, teacher, she says, we have bodies so that we can engage life. We need our bodies to experience our hearts and minds. Most of us will not transcend them until death. If the body can withstand the arising and ceasing of pain and suffering, there is no need to transcend it. We need to transcend instead our belief that spirituality does not include the body. True safety can be experienced in this moment, not this particular moment at Spirit Rock in these conditions, but in the present moment. And so when we're able to have a mind that sees clearly, that is composed, as the Buddha said, well, then what happens is that our heart isn't getting pushed and pulled by the winds of the hurricane. We're not kind of fluttering all over the place. And so then we can really touch into true safety being right here. Of course, within reason, if you are in danger at any point, it's not about being mindful of that moment and then mindfulness will protect you. And so this is generally speaking. But the time that I learned that really deeply, and in this, and I know I'm using this word unshakable a lot, but that's just, yeah, that's what really feels true right now. But in this unshakable way, I told one of my groups this story. It was my very first meditation retreat, and I did it in Thailand on a monastery. And if I had known this would happen, maybe I wouldn't have chosen this monastery, but it was a 10-day retreat, and the way that the retreat would unfold was that I would meet my teacher at around 8 in the morning for 5 minutes, and then he would say, okay, this is what your anchor will be. These are, we had a lot of touch points that we worked with and mental noting. So he's like, these are the things you'll note, and this is how long you'll do. You're sitting and you're walking. Come see me tomorrow. And then at some point in the retreat, maybe halfway, he was like, okay, what time are you sleeping? 10 p.m. And there was like a wake-up bell at 4 a.m. And so I was sleeping 6 hours. And then so he's like, okay, tonight, 4 hours. I was like, okay. And then I think the next night or a couple nights later, he's like, okay, 2 hours. I was like, well, okay. And then I thought, okay, now when I go see him, he's going to say, go back to 4, go back. And it was night 7. And he was like, okay, tonight, don't sleep. And I was like, challenge accepted, okay. I was like in it to win it. And so I didn't sleep. And then the next morning I was so proud and I was ready for my sleep assignment. And then he's like, and tonight, don't sleep again. And it was called the determination period. And you don't even leave your room and people bring you food instead. And so anyways, that happened. Or actually on the second day that he told me, I was like, okay. And then I left and I cried because I was so tired. But then I realized that if I thought about how tired I was, or in how long I could sleep, or the last time I slept, I was completely miserable. I cried. And the only solace I got from that misery was being in the moment. And so even when he told me the next night, don't sleep again, I was like, fine. I was like maybe too tired. So the surrender came easily. But my walking practice was crawling practice. And it was actually, one of the hardest things I'd ever done. And it was actually one of the most beautiful and powerful things I did too. Because I never knew how strong I was, or the power of my mind. As well as there was things that brought me to practice, quite challenging things, storylines, particularly around my relationship with my father. And in one of the nights, it was the middle of the night, and I noticed as well that it took energy to identify with the storyline of why things with my father were like so. And in that moment, there was a big release, like a freedom from that storyline, that it is not who I am. It is something that happened to me, but it is not me. And then I thought, oh, well, when I get a good night's sleep, it'll come back and I'll reattach kind of thing. And that's not true. It didn't happen ever since then. So I'm not saying, just in case, let me be clear, I'm not saying do not sleep for 3 days, but just there's so much power resting in the present moment. And even though parts of this retreat can feel challenging, not writing, listening to music, dancing, speaking to others, it's really so that you can orient inwards, see the answers that are already inside of you, tune into your superpower of non-contention, and strengthen it. Juna mentioned samatha or shamatha this morning, calming the mind. And it's certainly skillful and pleasant when the mind is calm. But the problem lies when we believe we're entitled to that calm. Sometimes I notice students or yogis will say something like, well, when I might say, like, and what are you experiencing in your practice? They'll be like, yeah, calm and yeah, like mindfulness, but really, and they kind of skip over that. And I'm like, hold on, that's huge, And they're like, yeah, but it's why I took a week off work. It's why I'm here to experience calm. So there's like this entitlement almost, Or because we're practicing at Spirit Rock, which we sometimes call the upper middle way, things are fairly well taken care of and we have it good here. And so a lot of times with that entitlement also comes like this clinging to calm or these states that might arise. And I see that manifest, for example, as a low tolerance for noise or disturbance on retreat. And then what happens is our practice gets really dependent on very specific conditions. And so I would say we might have a deep practice, but it might be shakeable, basically. Like everything, calm or shamatha comes and goes. And so it needs to be balanced with vipassana or insight, as Juna shared with us this morning. And they really work together. The Buddha wanted us to get calm, but not to stop there, but from there to reflect. On that retreat or at that monastery in Thailand, it was a fairly big, well, when I returned, actually, it was much bigger than the first time I was there. And when I returned a few years later, they had built this big building for novice monks. And it was, a lot of times, it was because when families were too poor to send their children to school, often a way to get educated was to send them to train as a monk. And yet some of the children, I think the youngest monk or age group was 5 or 6 years old. And then you had the whole range. But when you think of young boys, I don't know, I grew up with 2 brothers, and so they weren't very like slow walking and head down, you know. When they were not in class, it was really sweet to see them pull up their robes and start running after each other. And this is at the retreat center where we were practicing. And then a nun would come out and take off her slipper and raise it, and which was very much like my childhood, actually, my mom raising her slipper at me and my brothers, but that's another story. And so this nun would like raise her slipper, sometimes throw it at them to try to get them to like stop running or stop yelling at each other, etc. And I love that because there's like so much life basically at this monastery or at a lot of monasteries I've been to. But when I first saw it, I did notice there was a little bit of a rub. There was a tightening that happened inside of me because I was walking around the monastery, but I had come from a place that was relatively quiet. But in that, not long after that, I thought, you know, there was certainly resistance of like, don't they know and shouldn't they be, etc. But then I thought, well, I'm halfway around the world in Thailand. I'm in a Buddhist country practicing Buddhism. The support of the community was palpable in so many ways, not just through the alms round and the foods that were donated, but just the ways that the community came to prop up the Bodhi tree when the branches were too big, were quite large, and the ways that they would drop little treats off at the monastery, etc. And then I had the support of friends and family at home. And then I was having regular access to teachings and practice. And I think I was traveling during the Canadian winter in Thailand. So, you know, there's like a lot of great conditions, basically. And I found myself still wanting it to be different. And then that's when I realized that, oh, wait, I was making my practice dependent on certain things instead of meeting the moment without contention. Ajahn Chah has said, looking for certainty in what is not certain, you are bound to suffer. And so I thought maybe, I didn't realize, but in that moment I thought, oh, well, if I have all these things, the support, the location, the tropical temperatures, teachings, etc., then that is certain that I will find peace, etc. But no. And so in the calm, the shamatha, and with the support of insight, we begin to see that not just calm changes, not that not only that comes and goes, but everything. We begin touching into the teaching of anicca or impermanence. And I gave this as an instruction at the end a few days ago on the first morning, which might feel like years ago. But it was basically to try to orient ourselves to the spaces between, say, breaths or sound, etc. And often I do that as a way for us to begin to orient to the rising, the lingering of, and the passing away. And so you can try that with whatever your anchor is, whatever you're working with, and then eventually you start noticing that with other phenomena. For example, we'll do it now with sound. And so you can turn your eyes downward or close your eyes, but try to catch even the arising, the lingering, and the passing away. And depending on where you are in the room, it'll also be different for each of you. And so that's possible not just with the bell, but with everything. I saw this meme on social media. Memes are one of my love languages. And it was something along like how we might define success based on permanence. And then when things change, well, then on the flip side, then we might identify or think of ourselves as a failure. When a marriage ends, when we leave a job, when we stop writing the book that we no longer want to write, that somehow we're a failure. But everything changes. After Kitasaro's talk the other night, when we were in the teacher's lounge, he was still spewing wisdom bombs. And one of the things he said was, being well with what comes and goes leads to freedom. Being well with what comes and goes leads to freedom. And so why is it important to tune into anicca? Well, one of the biggest lessons for me is that we don't have to make things go away. It is of their nature to pass away. So when I'm fighting a heart or mind state, like my agitation, my fatigue, my sadness, my grief, it takes energy. And in that fighting, actually the opposite happens. It perpetuates it. It'll hang around longer. And another wisdom bomb from the other night, a lot gets solved with a willingness to be with ourselves. Kitasaro again. And so what gets cultivated is a steadiness of the heart and mind. The steadfastness that is not measured, or with this steadfastness, our self-worth, our identity, our worthiness of love isn't measured by the comings and goings of external circumstances. And so in a lot of ways, even though we might think of, sometimes the image of shamatha could be a still pool, but I think of, at least in this moment, even though the image Juna gave us this morning, and that comes also from Ajahn Chah's, a candle and matches of shamatha and vipassana together, I like to think of it as like this bowl, or this bell, where it can hold a lot inside. It could even be struck from the outside, and yet it's still there. It's still sitting on its cushion. It's unshakable. It's like this bowl can represent peace, and this peace is here and now. We just tend to lose sight of this peace when we grasp at things unknowingly, a lot of times. Heart and mind states that arise, and when we're fighting with it, there's this grasping. And then what happens is, in that grasping, we might not realize it, but there tends to be this identification of this is me or mine. And yet it changes. And so the Buddha said, if something changes, it doesn't make sense to call it me. Sri Nisargadatta says, love tells me I am everything. Wisdom tells me I am nothing. Between the two, my life flows. And so, as best we can, we try to allow our heart and mind states to come and go. And I just want to recognize that language makes it sound simple, like using words to say, oh, just let it come and go. But of course, as you know, on your third day of retreat, that it's not that simple. And so as best we can, when an unpleasant heart or mind state is present, often what helps is a shift in attitude. Because when an unpleasant mind state arises, there could be this wave of sensitivity, like this shouldn't be happening, this is wrong, this is a mistake, this should go away. And yet, what is arising is part of this human package. They come about because of their own causes and conditions. They don't arise because you're a bad person or a bad practitioner. They arise because of their own conditioned life. And they arise, and when they arise, it's not a mistake. Pema Chodron says, they will come until we've learned from them what we need to know, which is how to be free in relation to them. When a pleasant heart or mind state arises, as best we can, don't cling. Because in that clinging, there is suffering. And if you do cling, which is very likely, to try to let go as soon as you notice. And then, of course, to remember their life cycle, their nature. They arise, they linger, they pass away. To end, a story of from Ajahn Chah, the story of the boulders. You might know of this one. We were out wandering in the rice paddies. I think this is from Jack Cornfield. We were out wandering in the rice paddies on our way to a village to collect alms food one day with my teacher, Ajahn Chah, and some monks. And out across the rice paddies was this great big rock, a boulder. And Ajahn Chah said, "Is that boulder heavy?" He asked the question kind of
kind of the way a Zen master would. And being intelligent young monks, we said, "Yes, it is, master." And he smiled and he said, "Not if you don't pick it up." And so if you do pick it up, put it down or loosen your grasp. Sometimes loosening the grasp is the first step, and before we can even imagine letting go or putting down. And then when we are able to be free in relation to what is arising, what gets revealed is what is already here. This, your natural essence, to be aware. This being that has boundless loving kindness and compassion, joy and wisdom. And so earlier I said, we might make the problems out there. And I want to add to that, the solutions are also not out there, but it's already here inside of you. And I sometimes think that we're not really teachers, we are reminderers. We're really just reminding you what is here. And it's normal because of the way our society is designed for us to forget or to get distracted, to not see that. And I feel like our main job is just to remind you, like, no, don't look there. Look over here. So that you can see what is already here, basically.